Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. We usually think of language learning as a totally neutral process, right? Just picking up vocabulary, memorizing grammar rules, that whole thing. But a really fascinating study from the Journal of Second Language Teaching and Research by Natalia Fedorova and Kashmir Kaur argues that the very foundation of how English is taught worldwide might actually be built on a deeply ingrained bias. So today, we're going to explore their findings and unpack what they call the hidden biases deeply rooted in the English language teaching industry. To kick things off, we really need to ask ourselves a fundamental question about our own language biases. Honestly, what does good English actually sound like? Think about it for a second. When you picture a top-tier, expert English speaker, whose voice pops into your head? Is it an American news anchor, maybe a British actor? Well, if you immediately thought of someone from a Western English-speaking country, you are definitely not alone. But why is that? Why do we automatically associate language mastery with a specific geographic origin? This brings us to a really interesting academic concept called native-speakerism. It was coined by a researcher named Holliday back in 2006, and the study defines it as a pervasive ideology suggesting that native speakers, along with Western teaching methodologies, are just inherently superior. According to the research, this creates an automatic hierarchy. It means the non-native speaker is always playing catch-up, forever positioned as a subordinate in the very language they are trying to master. It's like a game you literally can't win. Now, what's completely wild is how the English language teaching world has kind of weaponized the word authentic. While dictionaries define authentic simply as being faithful to an original, the study argues that the language industry often restricts authentic materials exclusively to those from inner circle countries, places like the US and the UK. The source research even points out that this idealized native speaker standard has historically been problematically tied to race, where the idealized speaker is often assumed to be Caucasian. So, according to the authors, it turns a linguistic goal into an exclusionary standard. And the crucial point here is that this native speaker myth isn't just upheld by a few biased teachers. No, it's maintained by massive systemic gatekeepers. We're talking about the major dictionaries, the Common European Framework, and global testing giants like IELTS and TOEFL. As our sources highlight, these institutions have a huge incentive to maintain the status quo because, let's be real, owning the rules of the English language is a highly, highly lucrative business. Let's look at the CEFR descriptors for the C2 level, which is the absolute top tier of fluency. They explicitly demand a full range of phonological features for perfect clarity. But the researchers ask a really critical question here: clear to whom? The standard is subtly set to what a native speaker would easily understand. This implies that if a non-native speaker keeps legitimate, totally understandable features of their own regional accent, they might actually be penalized, even if they are perfectly intelligible to millions of other English speakers all over the world. And it gets even more explicit when we look at standardized testing. Notice the specific requirement for an IELTS Band 9 in speaking. The official rubric literally states that the only acceptable errors are the slips characteristic of native speaker speech. The researchers highlight this as solid proof that the ultimate benchmark explicitly rejects global variations. It completely dismisses the natural variations and slips characteristic of the many global regional varieties of English, explicitly favoring the native speaker. Section 2. The Great Student Paradox: What Learners Say versus What They Believe. So a recent study actually went out and surveyed adult English learners in Portugal and Arabic-speaking students in the UK, and they uncovered some seriously fascinating cognitive dissonance. The researchers looked at students at the University of Coimbra and the University of Leeds. These were highly educated adults, many of them studying at the master's or doctorate level, and they used both anonymous questionnaires and face-to-face interviews to really get to the bottom of how these students viewed their own accents and this whole concept of standard English. The data reveals a staggering number: 80%. 80% of these students are subconsciously enforcing this myth on themselves, desperately wishing they had a British or American accent. The quantitative data from the anonymous survey was just undeniable. The vast majority of these learners harbor a really deep-seated desire to sound like they are from an inner circle country. The American accent was highly desired, obviously due to the global dominance of Hollywood and pop culture, while the British accent was revered as this ultimate symbol of education, prestige, and authority. But wait, here is the great paradox. When these exact same students sat down for face-to-face interviews, 86% of them proudly claimed that native accents didn't matter to them at all. When sitting across from a researcher or a peer, they completely changed their tune. They stated they were totally happy with their accents, that it was a proud part of their identity, and that imitating a native speaker wasn't important. The researchers actually attribute this to social desirability bias. Basically, the students wanted to project a modern, open-minded, social justice-oriented viewpoint when they were speaking out loud. Yet, the anonymous survey data completely betrays their spoken words. When they didn't have to perform for an interviewer, 76% admitted they thought the standard British or American accent sounded better than their own. Furthermore, 43% noted they were actively ashamed that their accent didn't sound native enough. The researchers argue this just shows how incredibly deep the industry's conditioning actually runs. It's a deep-seated inferiority complex regarding their own cultural identities. There's a quote from one of the students that just perfectly captures this whole psychological mystery. They said, "We have to follow them because we can't learn the language if we didn't follow them. It's their language." Even when students express that English should belong to everyone, their actual word choices betrayed them. They repeatedly use the words them and their language. They view themselves as just passive receivers of rules set by a distant, superior authority. They're entirely disconnected from the idea that they, as bilingual or multilingual speakers, have any ownership over the English they speak every single day. Now, a lot of students tried to defend their goals by saying, "Hey, I just want my pronunciation to be clear and intelligible." It sounds like a great neutral compromise, doesn't it? Like they've totally escaped the native speakerist trap. They resolve their internal conflict by focusing purely on clarity. But one UK participant blew the lid off this idea, leaving an optional comment that brilliantly exposes the ultimate illusion. They pointed out that a clear pronunciation is, in fact, defined by native speakers. The researchers argue that when a student aims for clarity, they are often unknowingly endorsing Western phonological rules. They haven't actually escaped the trap at all. The trap is just wearing a different disguise. Section 3, Rethinking Language Ownership, a New Path Forward. So, how do we actually fix this deeply ingrained problem? Well, a proposed solution in the study is shifting from EFL, English as a foreign language, to ELF, English as the lingua franca. While the traditional EFL model treats English as something borrowed from native speakers, ELF recognizes a modern reality. The vast majority of English conversations today are between two non-native speakers. Think about an executive in Tokyo speaking to a vendor in Berlin, for example. The focus shifts entirely to mutual intelligibility and global communication, rather than forcing students to mimic a Western accent. But of course, transforming an entire industry is incredibly tough. The crucial takeaway is that while awareness is definitely growing, international exams and publishers still hold all the cards. As the researchers point out, you can't just tell a teacher to switch to an ELF model. Why? Because there are almost no mainstream course books designed around it. More importantly, students rely on teachers to help them pass IELTS or TOEFL for immigration or university access. And as long as those exams strictly gatekeep native standards, teachers are essentially forced to teach to the native speakerist test. It's a huge roadblock. So I will leave you with this final, provocative thought to challenge your own perceptions of language and power. If we truly believe that English is a global language, an international tool that belongs to all its speakers, then why do we continue to let a small fraction of those speakers dictate what is correct, what is clear, and what is beautiful? Next time you hear a diverse global accent, ask yourself what you are really judging, their actual ability to communicate or their distance from a constructed, outdated myth. Thank you so much for exploring this research with me on this explainer. Keep questioning the standards, and I'll see you next time.